Welcome to the Section 111 podcast with your host, TJ Shoemaker. And welcome to episode 4 of the Section 111 podcast. I'm your host, TJ Shoemaker, and today I'm going to be riding solo for just a little bit, but I am going to bring my brother back in to discuss some Week 1 college football betting. So if you like to bet, you're going to love this analysis that he brings and breaking down some Week 1 betting lines. But before I get started, I want to remind you all that you can find each Section 111 podcast episode on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And if you haven't, be sure to rate and review the show. Let everyone know what they're getting with this podcast. And I truly appreciate all the feedback that you guys have left. It really means a lot to me. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. So some recent college football news. Former five-star Alabama running back Trey Sanders just recently suffered a season-ending foot injury. I read that it happened in the last play of practice last Thursday. So that's some bad news for the Tide there. Sticking with the 5 stars, Florida gets a former 5-star pass rusher, Brenton Cox. He transfers over from Georgia. Some of you Buckeye listeners, you might know that name. He's actually a former OSU commit. He signed with Georgia in 2018, but last season as a freshman, he recorded 20 tackles, had 2 tackles for a loss, and recorded a sack as well. So Dan Mullen and company getting some much needed depth on the defensive line, and bringing in a 5-star like that. That's definitely big news for the Gators. But the big news of the week is coming out of Coral Gables, Florida. The Miami Hurricanes have decided to name Jaron Williams the starting quarterback over Tate Martell and N'Kosi Perry. That's making headlines, not so much because Jaron is the quarterback, but more so because Tate Martell is not. As we all know, he transferred from Ohio State back in January, I believe, and he's kind of caught a lot of flack for some of the things that he has said, particularly the tweet kind of angled towards Justin Fields whenever the rumors were kind of swirling that Justin Fields might be making the transfer from Georgia to Ohio State. And Tate Martell's tweet back in December reads this: "Don't swing and miss, especially not your second time." And, that's definitely sounds like it was directed at Justin Fields, and he's definitely caught a lot of heat for that now, considering it's the second, quarterback battle, essentially, that he was going to have to go through, and he ended up losing it anyway. So it's hard to feel sorry for the guy, honestly. I mean, he's kind of brought this negativity and this, this negative light upon himself, and it's just hard for me personally to feel sorry for him in this situation, considering the shots that he has taken, kind of the cockiness and arrogance about him that comes across, at least to me personally. And, there's that fine line between cockiness and confident, and he definitely flirts with that line, and it's kind of come back to bite him in the butt. And a lot of people have been very vocal on Twitter about it. I believe that Tate Martell was actually trending on Twitter because of his comments that he made back in December about Justin Fields. And, most recently, I'm a big fan of the Last Chance U series on Netflix. And I had stumbled across a Netflix series kind of similar to that called QB1 Beyond the Lights. And what they do on that show is they follow 3 big-time quarterbacks from across the country. One was Tate Martell, the second was Jake Fromm, and the third was a kid that ended up at Wake Forest. His name was Tavon Bowers, and they follow them. You get to see inside their family and their school and their football program, and you get to really see how these guys operate on a daily basis. And in that show, it basically confirmed my personal perspective on Tate Martell from what I thought I knew. Yeah, I mean, it really just kind of confirmed that he had a cockiness and that arrogance about him. I didn't really know how big of a leader he was. I thought being the quarterback of Bishop Gorman High School in Las Vegas. That's one of the biggest high school programs in America. I thought that it would have been instilled in him to kind of be a big time leader, and in that series you just didn't really see that. And not only was he not a leader, but he kind of put off that spoiled golden boy mantra per se, and it was just not attractive to watch. Some of the things about him, it reminds me a lot of a Shea Patterson. He's kind of got that arrogance about him, but he's very talented, but I don't think that he puts in the work and does the little things that he needs to do to be a big time Division I quarterback. And you're seeing that right now with him not being named the starter in Coral Gables. So it might be back to the transfer portal for Tate Martell. But the opposite kind of goes for Jake Fromm when watching that series, because he is actually a big time leader, more so than I ever really knew. And he is truly a student of the game. And I was so impressed when watching that series with Jake Fromm, and it kind of made me a Jake Fromm fan. I'm a Florida fan, and therefore, Georgia is a big time rival. But watching Jake Fromm, man, he won me over, and I'm a huge Jake Fromm fan now. And I hope that he goes on to the NFL to do big things, because he comes from a great family. He's a very humble kid, and watching that series was very positive as far as the effect that it had on me and my thinking towards Jake Fromm. So if you haven't seen QB1 Beyond the Lights, there's actually 2 seasons of it. I just finished up season 1. I'm starting season 2, and I'm honestly not even sure all the quarterbacks that are in it. I do know that Justin Fields is a quarterback featured on season 2. So if you want to go check that out, be sure to do so, because it really was a good show. Getting prepared for the season, I wanted to kind of give you guys my opinion on the top 10 most electric college football players in 2019. That way, you can kind of be on the lookout for some guys when you're watching college football. Maybe it might be a team that you're not too familiar with, but keep an eye on these 10 guys. And at number 10, I've got CeeDee Lamb, the wide receiver from Oklahoma. Last year, he had over 1,100 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns, and averaged 17.8 yards per catch. This season, I expect big things from him again, although I do expect maybe a slight drop in production, just because he's going to be kind of the main focus of the opposing defenses with dynamic wide receiver Marquise Brown moving on to the NFL. So I think that you could see that slight drop in production, but he's still going to be a big-time playmaker for Jalen Hurts and Lincoln Riley this upcoming season. At number 9, I've got Justin Ross, the wide receiver from Clemson. He had over 1,000 yards receiving and 9 touchdowns just as a true freshman last season, and he averaged a whopping 21.7 yards per catch. He's very dynamic after the catch and elusive in open field. So he can house it on any given play given the opportunity. So be on the lookout for Justin Ross to have a big 2019 with Trevor Lawrence behind center. At number 8, I've got maybe an unknown name to some of you. I've got Keyshawn Vaughn, the Vanderbilt running back. Last season he had over 1,200 yards rushing, 14 total touchdowns, and 12 of those were rushing, and he averaged 8.3 yards per touch. And he also had 13.1 yards per reception. So anytime he got the ball, he knew exactly what to do with it. He's a hard-nosed runner and also elusive in the open field, and has great speed and power to go with it. So Keyshawn Vaughn is kind of a do-it-all back for the Vanderbilt Commodores. At number 7, I've got Kadarius Toney, the Florida wide receiver / running back. He had over 500 total yards last season and averaged 10.9 yards per touch, and also had 1 receiving and 1 passing touchdown last season. I have him a little bit low just due to the lack of production over the past couple of seasons, but he is one of the most electric and dynamic players with the ball in his hands, and I expect Dan Mullen to kind of find ways to get Kadarius Toney a few more touches per game, because he is electric when he gets it and one of the shiftiest players that you'll ever watch. At number 6, I've got Greg McCray, the UCF running back, who had over 1,100 yards rushing, 11 total touchdowns, 10 of those were rushing, and averaged 9.2 yards per touch. He's so fast in the open field and has elite speed and elite burst when finding the hole. He has a good patience about him, but as soon as he finds that hole, he can accelerate very quickly, and he's really fun to watch. I love watching Greg McCrae. At number 5, I've got Auburn wide receiver Anthony Schwartz. Last season, he had over 500 total yards of offense with 7 touchdowns. 5 of those were rushing, and averaged 11.6 yards per touch and 16.2 yards per reception. So anytime he gets it, it's always a big explosive play. He's probably the fastest player in college football, and I have him a little bit lower on the list just because he's not as shifty as some of the other guys. But Gus Malzahn does a good job of getting him out on the edge, getting him some bubble screens, and getting the ball in his hands. So I expect his production to go up a little bit this season as Gus Malzahn finds ways to get him the ball even more. At number 4, I've got another Clemson Tiger, Travis Etienne. The running back had over 1,600 yards rushing last season to go along with 26 total touchdowns. 24 of those were rushing, and he averaged 8.0 yards per touch. Travis Etienne is one of the fastest players in college football, and there's not many people that can catch him from behind, and he's a special running back, and I look for him to do really big things this season before making the jump to the NFL. At number 3, I've got TCU wide receiver Jalen Reagor. Last season, he had over 1,000 yards receiving to go along with 9 touchdowns, and he averaged 14.7 yards per reception. He also had 170 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns and averaged 13.1 yards per carry, and that's good for 14.5 yards per touch. So anytime Jalen Reagor got a hold of it, he made big things happen because, 14.5 yards per touch, that's insane. And I look for Gary Patterson in that offense to find ways to get Jalen Reagor the ball, as he's both good in the bubble screens and jet sweeps, but he's also a good downfield threat. So he's as dynamic as they come in college football. At number 2, I've got Alabama wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. Last season, he had over 1,300 yards receiving to go along with 14 touchdowns and averaged 19.3 yards per catch. Jerry Jeudy is one of the best route runners that I've seen in college football over the past couple of years, and he is as elusive as anybody when it comes to run after the catch, and he can juke and stop on a dime and has the ability to change direction and accelerate so quickly, and it's really special to watch, and I love watching Jerry Jeudy, and I think that he's going to end up being a top 10 pick in next April's NFL draft. He's that special, and I love watching him, so be on the lookout for him to do big things this season. And at number 1, I've got Purdue wide receiver Rondale Moore. Last season, he had over 1,200 receiving yards to go along with 14 total touchdowns. 12 of those were receiving, and he averaged 10.9 yards per touch. And, he was just special to watch. His center of gravity is so low to the ground, and he's able to accelerate through the smallest of holes, and he's just so special to watch. And I love watching how Jeff Brom finds ways to get him the ball. And I'm going to be anxious to see how opposing defenses respond to Rondale Moore this season, and if they can find any ways to kind of neutralize him, because last year no defensive coordinator was able to do that because he was just so electric and dynamic. And Purdue's been very creative in how they get Rondale Moore the ball, and I'm anxious to see if they can kind of maintain that and keep finding ways to get him the ball and show off his explosiveness. But yeah, that's my top 10 most electric players to look out for in 2019. And just keep in mind that this list wasn't based on like the top 10 running backs or receivers. So there are some players that are better than others that are on this list. But, this was strictly just who was the most dynamic and exciting with the ball in their hands. And from what I've seen and what I've researched, this is what I came up with. So I truly hope that you guys enjoyed it. And if I left someone off, be sure to tweet at me or let me know who you think might be deserving of this list. So I'm definitely open to hearing your all's opinions as well. So now let's get into some college football week 1 betting lines. And to do that, we're going to bring in my brother, and he's going to come in and talk to us about some numbers and computer models that he has that he's come up with. And he's going to kind of talk about who might have a competitive edge in what matchups and where you should be putting your money. All right, and I'm here with Tyler Shoemaker. I'd like to welcome him back to the pod. He made his appearance on episode 1, and it's really good to have him back on. Tyler, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. I'm glad to be back on. I'm excited that the podcast is doing so well. I've tuned into every episode, and I think you're doing a great job with it. So I'm just proud to be a part of it, and excited that college football is back and that we can kind of talk about that and get into it right here before the season starts.
Yeah, definitely. And with getting back into the season, along with that comes what everybody loves is Vegas and college football betting lines. And you, in your spare time, do a lot of number crunching, and you have your own little computer system that helps you come up with some numbers that helps find some competitive edges for certain teams. So just kind of talk about your process and just how that all works.
Yeah. So what I do is I look at about 10 different computer models that are available online, all from respected college football minds, and just data scientists and stuff that all they do is just crunch numbers. And so I don't want to go with just one, because when you look at just one data set, there's going to be biases just inherently, whether that's, automatically putting more weight behind, like an SEC team or something like that, or maybe the bias is towards teams that have a more explosive offense, and don't account for defense as much. So there are just biases with every data set. So I try to use about 10 different ones. That way, my theory is by using that many, the numbers are more pure, and we can eliminate as much bias as possible. So I mean, last year using this model, I was able to win several pick'em contests weekly, and I also finished second in a season-long contest, and I only finished second by one game against the spread. So that was just kind of an unlucky bounce for me. But hopefully this year I can bounce back and make some decent money.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope that you can kind of help myself and some other people win little extra side cash throughout the year also. And so just kind of talk about like your top plays that you've kind of accumulated for week one, and what kind of competitive edge maybe a couple of those teams might have on their opponent.
Yeah, so looking at these early week one lines, and that's kind of the key, is I try to look at it as early as possible, because oftentimes if you wait too late, a lot of people will make their wager, on game day, but by that time, a lot of the sharp people have already placed their bets and moved those lines in unfavorable ways, so you don't find as much value. And actually, my top play so far for week one is actually going to be Fresno State plus 13.5 against USC. And surprisingly, that game opened at about USC minus 9.5. And because USC is such a big public brand, that a bunch of public money came in and has pushed that line to 13.5. And according to my numbers, I would have that line at about USC minus 6. So, I mean, we're getting, according to my numbers, 7.5 points of value there. So I think I'm probably going to hammer that game. And not only does my projection have it at, would have that line at 6, but all 10 computer models were in agreement that Fresno State would cover a 13.5 spread.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Just looking at the raw statistics and everything, USC coming off a 5-7 season. Their quarterback was just a freshman last year, JT Daniels. He threw for 14 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. So while I think he will progress a little bit, how much is he going to progress in one season, especially in game one against a Fresno State team that returned 6 starters on a defense that only gave up 14 points a game last year. So I think that'll definitely be a defensive battle, and Fresno State can at least hang in there and cover the spread.
Yeah, definitely. I don't necessarily expect Fresno State to win by any means, but you look at last year, they had a plus 12 turnover margin. So they're good at turning the other teams over. And like you mentioned with JT Daniels, having some interception problems, I think that right there can keep the game close. USC may come out, like I said, I would have them favored by about a touchdown. But I do think Fresno covers the number.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there. So let's move on to another pick. What do you have up next?
Yeah, so my second ranked game right now, and these two are pretty close. I've got NC State minus 17.5. Now that line has been teetering between 17.5 and 18 in some books, depending on where you're betting. And I will tell the listeners, according to my numbers, I would take that bet at either number. So even if you get it at NC State minus 18, I would still take that. A lot of times when people give out picks, they give out a number that then by the time people hear, the podcast or read it or whatever, the line's moved, a point and a half, and the line that they gave out's no good. But I would take that. My numbers would have that line at about 23.5 is where I would set that line. So, getting really good value there. So I'm all in on NC State minus 17.5.
Yeah, and going back to 2018, these two teams actually met last season, and ECU was only able to muster 104 yards of total offense. They had 3 turnovers and only 4 first downs for the entire game. So NC State was able to win this game against ECU 58-3. And bad news for ECU, NC State actually returns 7 starters on defense from their 2018 team. So I look for ECU to struggle to score points again. And while NC State did lose quarterback Ryan Finley, I think that they'll have no trouble moving the ball against this ECU defense either. So yeah, I like NC State at minus 17 or minus 18, either one.
Yeah, and I've looked. I don't put a ton of stock into against the spread trends because, like I mentioned before, it's hard to really verify. When you see, oh, this team is 8-2 against the spread, whatever. A lot of times you can't verify what number they're referring to because obviously lines are fluid and they move. So I don't put a ton of stock into that. But one trend that I did see is ECU, who NC State is playing. ECU has been absolutely atrocious against the spread when they are road underdogs, which they are in this game. I don't remember the exact number, but it was atrocious. They were like 20% against the spread over the last 3 seasons in that role. So I'm, that's just one more thing, some icing on the cake as far as pushing me to put some money on NC State.
Yeah, and as far as the numbers changing, you don't know what the opening line versus what the closing line was, so that's kind of that variable change that you're talking about.
Yep, exactly.
So, but yeah, ECU, I think they only won 2 games last year, so they've kind of been atrocious, just straight up the past couple of seasons. So, I definitely agree with you on NC State there to cover.
Yep, and I do just one last note on that game. I do want to point out that even though my number has the line at 23.5, again, like the Fresno State game, all 10 computer models were in agreement that they would cover that number.
Yeah, that's a good note too. So moving on to the third game that you have, what do you have as your number 3 game of week 1?
So my number 3 game, and this is usually where I try to draw the line. I try to look at my top 3 every week and really focus my money there as far as betting. But again, I know some of the listeners, may have questions about a particular game, so we'll try to touch on some big program games here in just a second. But my third pick and where I would draw the line as far as being better than the rest of the numbers, according to my numbers, is Duke plus 33.5 against Alabama. And I know a lot of people probably are shocked to hear that I'm going to fade Alabama, but I will say, last year and in recent years under Nick Saban, Alabama has been an excellent first half against the spread team, but they have failed to cover big numbers like this, mostly because they just beat the crap out of everyone. So their starters don't play much in the second half. So a lot of times they'll have a huge lead at halftime, and then it doesn't really swell in the second half, and they end up falling short of these big numbers. So my numbers would have this line at about 28.5. So you're getting about 5 points of line value there. And 9 of the 10 computer models were in agreement. And the one that didn't had the line at 34. So only a half point higher than what the line actually is. So, I mean, it's, so it's right there. So I feel good about that game as well.
Yeah, I mean, even though it's Alabama, to beat another Power 5 opponent by 33 points is no small task. So, I'm kind of in agreement there that Duke has the ability to cover. Obviously, they're not going to win the game, but
No.
they do have the ability to not lose by 5 or 6 touchdowns. So
yeah, and I think, and again, another tidbit, with the betting market that I think a lot of people get too hung up on is the public bet percentage. And it's one of those things that's, again, just kind of icing on the cake. You generally would want to fade the public. And the last time I checked, Alabama was getting like 81% of the bets in this game, which, again, to clarify, is not a make or break thing for me. That's not the first thing I look at, or even the second, third, or fourth. But once I've kind of come to a decision, I do take a peek at that to see, what side the public's on. And the public is heavy on Alabama, which makes me feel even better about my pick.
Yeah, that's a good point, too. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, so some other big-time games around the country in Week 1. One that I wanted to personally talk about is Florida versus Miami. So what's that line at right now as we speak?
Right now, that line is at Florida -7, which I think it opened at Florida -7.5. And I think some early money came in on Miami and moved that line down. I personally, my numbers would have this line at about -9. So you're getting a couple points of value there. And 8 of my 10 computer models have Florida covering that number.
Yeah, so I mean, as a Florida fan, and trying to put bias aside as much as I can, I think that this is at least a 10-point game, just based on last season and Florida's success that they had then. I look for the offense to be clicking on all cylinders this season, and the defense returns 8 starters on offense, plus cornerback Marco Wilson, who started 2 years ago, that was out for last season. So basically 9 starters, and Florida's defense is going to be a force to be reckoned with. So I really like Florida better than Miami on both sides of the ball. So I think 7 is a very favorable number. So my recommendation, which don't listen to me, but I would definitely jump on that.
Yeah, no, I definitely think, I mean, and this is one game from an X's and O's standpoint, just my numbers aside, I agree with you. I mean, Florida's defense is always outstanding, especially in the secondary. And, with Miami just announcing that they're starting freshman Jaron Williams, I think Florida will feast on him and kind of bait him into some mistakes. And I do look for Florida's offense to take a step up with Felipe Franks this year with some talented young wide receivers to go with him.
Yeah, and just giving the listeners some more knowledge about Florida particularly, and also Miami. Florida's biggest question mark is the offensive line, and they're going to have to replace 4 starters. So that's a big task that they have. But with John Hevesy as the offensive line coach, he's a very good one, and I think that he's going to have the O-line ready. But on the other side of the ball for Miami, you mentioned Jaron Williams. He's only thrown 3 college passes, and that was last season, and only completed 1 of them. So, I mean, small sample size, but, it is what it is. And the fact of the matter is that he's going to be going against an experienced Florida defense with Todd Grantham as the defensive coordinator. And if anyone knows anything about Todd Grantham, he's one of the most aggressive defensive coordinators. In the Mississippi State game last year, 4th and 10, he blitzed 8 guys. I mean, he brought the house, and that's the type of coordinator that he is. I mean, he's super aggressive, and he's going to be feasting on that quarterback all night.
Yep, I agree.
All right, so moving on to another game, I wanted to touch on Auburn and Oregon.
So this game is a little tricky. This game opened at Auburn -6.5, and that number disappeared almost immediately. Right now, it's teetering. Most spots have it at Auburn -3. Have seen some Auburn -3.5. And I will say my numbers are pretty mixed on this game. I don't have a strong lean either way. I would have this line at about 4.5. So, I mean, you're getting about a point and a half of value on Auburn if you want to go that way. And about 7 of the 10 computer models that I look at have Auburn covering that number. So Um, I I would say it's a lean to Auburn for me. I don't like it, and I definitely don't love it. Um, but it would be a slight lean to Auburn for me.
Yeah, this is the game that your numbers are kind of weary of, and I'm a little bit weary of when looking at it. Two very good teams. Auburn has some question marks, especially at quarterback. They have a freshman quarterback battle going on there. So Auburn, you don't know what you're going to get with them. I do know that they have one of the best defensive lines in the country, led by Derek Brown and Marlon Davidson. So those two are going to wreak havoc, but you really don't know what to expect from the offense. But even though Gus Malzahn is kind of known as an offensive guy, you really don't know what to expect going into this
Yeah,
season.
and I mean, just historically, Oregon has not fared well against big physical teams, whether that be, an SEC team or, Ohio State in the national championship. They've tended to, when they play big physical teams, they've tended to struggle. So that again would kind of be the icing on the cake for my lean towards Auburn. But I'm not confident enough in that to make a play. But if anyone out there is, hoping to lay some money on that game, I would lean Auburn.
Yeah, that's a great point too. I was going to bring that up that Oregon has historically kind of struggled with the bigger offensive and defensive lines. So we'll see how that one plays out, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Are there any other big games that you wanted to touch on? I've got my full sheet of numbers here at your disposal.
Yeah, let's touch on Boise State and Florida State. That's kind of one that intrigues me a little bit, and I've kind of seen some mixed things on that. But I wanted to see what your numbers are kind of
Yeah,
suggesting.
this game, I'm pretty excited about this game, and I'm honestly probably going to end up sprinkling a little bit of money on this because the public has been so heavy on Florida State. Again, and I was telling someone this today, especially early in the season, you can look to fade some of these traditionally powerhouse programs that may not be up to par. You can find a lot of value in that because people are so excited that college football's back and they want to bet. And, Florida State has a big fan base, the same as USC. So you get a ton of public money in that kind of moves these lines in a valuable, favorable way for a sharp better. So I definitely almost love Boise State in this game. My numbers would have this at about a Florida State -1. So basically a pick 'em. And 8 of my 10 computer models agree with that. And the other 2 that disagree only have Florida State by 6, and that line's at 5. So, I mean, they're pretty close to the line. So I definitely feel really good about Boise State covering that number. And I wouldn't really even be shy about sprinkling a little bit on the Boise State money line either.
Yeah, I've actually seen some Boise State money line picks out there, with different Twitter accounts and stuff. But I really like that pick too. And for me, it's just until Willie Taggart shows something on the field, I'm going to have a hard time putting my money on him. So, I mean, last year was just atrocious for them, and I don't really know how much improvement they're going to make. They might win a couple of games, but opening up against a team like Boise State, who's typically very disciplined and very sound on offense and defense, I just don't know how they're going to fare in their first game against a team like that.
Yep, I agree. I'm all in on Boise on that.
All right. Do you got any more games that you wanted to talk about?
Just a couple quick ones that I know some of our listeners are probably curious about. Michigan is hosting Middle Tennessee State, and that is actually one of my top. I think that's one of my top 5 plays. Is Middle Tennessee State plus 33.5. I would have that line at about 29, and 8 of my 10 computer models agree with that number, and the 2 that don't would have the line at 34, so only a half point above what the line actually is. So if that line would move up a half point, then 100% of my models would be in agreement. So I definitely think Middle Tennessee State is a good play there. They've been a good group of 5 team over the years, and Michigan has just, until I see them with an explosive offense putting up points, I'm just not going to believe that they can score enough to cover a number that big.
Yeah, I'm not either. It's kind of the same, sort of the same with like Florida State. Like until I see a change in the offense, it's hard for me to put my money on Jim Harbaugh and that offense. Even though this year they're kind of supposed to be moving more to a spread offense with offensive
Right.
coordinator Josh Gaddis coming in, so uh, that's one that I'll go with what your numbers suggest, obviously, but I might personally stay away from it just until I see some product on the field for Michigan.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And then just a couple more quick ones we don't even have to get into. I'll just touch on what my numbers say because I know people are probably curious. Ohio State hosting Florida Atlantic. That line has been moving around a little bit, but in most spots it's 27.5. I like Florida Atlantic to cover that number. My numbers would have that line at about 25.5. So you're getting a couple points of value there. And 8 of my 10 computer models are in agreement on that. And then Clemson hosting Georgia Tech on a Thursday night. That line is 35.5. I would have it at about 34, which is close to where it opened. I think the opening line was more accurate, but some Clemson money has come in and pushed that line up. So I actually like Georgia Tech plus the points there. And 6 of the 10 computer models were in agreement there. So I think that covers most of the bigger programs, big games. I hope everyone took something from that.
Yeah, and kind of as the line changes, and probably leading right up to the game, are you going to be posting your picks on your Twitter page, or where could people maybe find that info if they wanted it?
Yeah, I will. I'll post. I'll take some feedback on that, but I'll probably post at least my top 5, and then if anybody has any questions about a particular lean on a game, please feel free to hit me up on Twitter at BuckeyeTie23.
All right, so a lot of good stuff there. Thanks for coming on the podcast and kind of sharing that with us, and I hope you help myself and the listeners win a lot of money this year.
Yeah, I hope so too. I appreciate it.
All right, well, I'll be sure to get you back on. We'll maybe try to make this a weekly thing. That way, we can kind of do it each week and preview some big time games each weekend if we can, and kind of get your top plays. But yeah, I appreciate you coming on.
Yep, definitely. Have a good one.
All right, I'll talk to you later. All right, and that was my brother Tyler Shoemaker with a lot of good info there on some week 1 college football betting. Like I said, we're going to try to make that maybe a weekly thing, so stay tuned for that, and we'll be sure to bring you some good info when it comes to where you should and shouldn't be placing your money. But that's going to do it for this episode. I really appreciate you all tuning in and all the support that you all have shown me up to this point. It's truly appreciated, and I really can't put it into words how much I appreciate it. But as always in this episode, I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you gained some perspective, and most importantly, I hope you all were entertained. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Section 111 podcast.